Hey, what up, YouTube? It's your old friend Dominic Tringali here. So, I'm going to do something a little different today. Mostly I've been using this channel to do my culture shock videos, Life in Sicily. But I wanted to get back to my roots and talk about why I came to YouTube about 5 years ago. And that's because I wanted to review DVDs. As you can obviously see, DVDs are a passion of mine. And so is film. It's what I went to school for originally and what I studied when I was at the University of Oregon. But one thing that kind of bothers me about the perception of film is the Internet Movie Database, IMDB, and the top 250 list. So I decided that what I want to do over the next, this project's going to take about a couple of years, is I want to systematically review every film on the IMDB list, because there are a few films on there that I haven't seen before. And I want to kind of form my own list, my own 250 list, and kind of rearrange the order. So I've printed out the complete list of films as of today, and I'm going to go one by one from the top to the bottom, and slowly but surely I'm going to report these films, what I thought about them, and I'm going to keep a running total down below in the description of what films I think are number 1, number 2, and so on all the way down to 250. So just be a building list. First and foremost, I want to talk about the score that IMDb gives a film. And that's what's based on what they call the weighted ratio. Okay? And I'm going to include the math down below. Anyone who has an understanding of basic algebra can understand this formula. And this algorithm is essentially to figure out your overall score. And whatever film has the highest overall score gets put on its respective number list on the spot on the list. And one film has been on the top of the list for as long as I can remember there was a list. And maybe it dropped to number 2 at one point, but I know it's back to number 1 now. And that film is The Shawshank Redemption, okay? Starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. And this film, I've seen it probably about 24 times on cable television, okay? I remember when I was younger, it was on TNT at least once a week. And this was the first time I ever actually watched it without commercial interruption and without, TV edits. And it is rated R, but I don't necessarily see why it should be rated R, because there's not an immense amount of strong language, and there's not a lot of graphic violence. It's just I think it got misrated, just like its overall rating on the IMDb list. I think it got misrated, and if you understand the math, like I said below, the reason, in my opinion, that it's so high on the list is purely mathematical. Okay, because the total number of votes factors heavily into your total score. And this film has close to 350,000 more votes than the number 2 film on the list. And so I think you can essentially manufacture a higher score by having just that many more votes. And I think that's fair. I mean, a film that gets more votes than another film should factor in somehow. But this film didn't win any Academy Awards when it came out in '94. Okay, but it had some really stiff competition in '94. I mean, anyone who remembers '94 can tell you it was a good year for films. We had Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction, just to name a few. And those are the films that more stand out in '94, in my mind at least. So, where I think is what's really interesting about this film, though, is that director Frank Darabont wrote and directed this along with writer Stephen King. And Stephen King's pretty famous for being a horror writer, but this film isn't necessarily horror. It's based on a short story that Stephen King wrote called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. So you can see where they got the title for the film. And I've never read the short story, but I imagine there's not much people always say the book was better, but I don't necessarily know anything about this short story, so I couldn't tell you. Maybe it's worth a read. So if anyone has read it, I would love to hear that in a comment down below. But Frank Darabont in '94, he hadn't done anything. He had directed student film, a made-for-TV movie, but mostly his contribution to Hollywood was in his writing. He had written the screenplay for the 1987 film Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, which anyone who's a big horror fan or a big Nightmare on Elm Street fan will tell you Dream Warriors is not the best one. And then he wrote the screenplay for the 1988 Blob remake, and then he also wrote the script for the '89 sequel to The Fly 2, and The Fly was actually a remake of an older film, but that's besides the point. So honestly, Frank Darabont had a lot of experience with horror, and he was working with a horror writer. But again, this film wasn't horror, in my opinion. It doesn't. I mean, there's elements of fear of being in prison. But that's another thing I want to talk about. Is like, what is the human fascination with prisons? I just finished watching Oz I'd seen it before, but I'd never watched it from beginning to end. And I finally took the time to sit down and marathon watch HBO's Oz. And, what exactly is it about prisons that are so fascinating? Is it the threat of gang rape? Are we interested in just how people, how we treat our prisoners, prison life in general? Like, what's the fascination? Prison's supposed to be a terrible place. And maybe that's the element of fear that, prison is a terrible place, and there's threat of violence, and physical and sexual. There's the loss of human rights. This element of loss to our freedoms and our sanity. I don't know. Maybe that's where the fear element comes in. But again, speaking of fear, Darabont, his other writing experience was with the Young Adventure, or the Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, which was a great TV show if you ever saw it. And he also did a few episodes of, speaking of HBO and Oz, he did a few episodes of Tales from the Crypt, which if you've never seen Tales from the Crypt and you like HBO, and I don't know why the hell you don't, and if you like horror, you need to watch Tales from the Crypt. It is so damn good. It's not even funny. The Crypt Keeper is hands down the best host of a horror series ever. And I think it took something like 12 animatronic puppeteers to operate that thing. And I every time I watch it, I just laugh my ass off. So I'm gonna get off that tangent and get right back to Shawshank Redemption. Like, again, why is this film rated number one? And I think it's the element of good writing and solid directing, but the acting in this film was just amazing. And I think the combination of Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman together, they had such on-screen chemistry. That was what it's kind of like a buddy drama, these two guys, and it wasn't gay, a lot of people would think if you got two guys in prison, it's going to turn into something homosexual, but it wasn't. It was purely a mutual respect for each other, and it was just amazing to watch these two guys on film, and Tim Robbins, up into '94, he had been mostly working in crappy comedy movies. He did just these terrible comedy movies like Bull Durham. They're not terrible, but as far as his acting chops go, they weren't challenging him too hard. I love Bull Durham, actually. Let me just rephrase that. It's not terrible, but he did films like Eric the Viking. Okay, he was not an Academy Award winning actor or even in contention. He didn't do anything that was outstanding. But Morgan Freeman, I mean, his career goes so far back to the '60s when he was like doing the Electric Company, and he played Malcolm X in the '80s in the Malcolm X movie. Which is not the Denzel Washington version. He was such. I mean, Morgan Freeman has such an iconic voice, and I think that's like 80 or 90% of his success as an actor is that idyllic voice that you could pick out of any crowd. There's a reason why he has played God, the voice of God, and there's a reason why he has done so much voice work. It's because that voice, man, people love it, and they imitate it. This movie's been parodied numerous times, partially because of Morgan Freeman's voice, which does the narration, and Oh, I will say one thing about Tim Robbins, though. He did do Jacob's Ladder, which was a pretty amazing film, in my opinion. If you've never seen that film, you should. It's not actually on the IMDb 250 list, so I'm just throwing that out there as an extra honorable mention that's not going to be on this list. But ultimately, I think this was a good film. But like I said, I don't think it's the best film. And 20 years later, it definitely has rewatchability. I watched it again, and at no point in time did I feel that, damn, this film is really long, despite the fact that it's like 2 hours, 10 minutes long. So what I look forward to doing this project and keeping a running tally, talking about the films, the ups and the downs. If you haven't ever seen this film before, I don't know where you've been for the last 20 years, probably hiding under a rock. If you actually have never seen this before, or it's been a long time since you've seen it and you don't remember it too well, go out and watch it again. Rent a copy, Netflix a copy, buy a copy. Don't download it off the internet, because people deserve to get paid, make some money. The film industry needs your help just as much as you need it to entertain you. And again, I'm going to leave you with a message from the film, which was Tim Robbins' character Andy Dufresne's thoughts on hope. And hope is a good thing, okay? Maybe the best of things. Good things never die. And that's what I think this film is a good thing that will never die. And I really look forward to seeing if it joins the Criterion collection of amazing films of the last 100 years. And so, if it truly is a classic, or just eventually will fade out of popularity with people and eventually get pushed farther and farther down this list on its own. So next week, I'm going to be reviewing The Godfather Part 1, and which should be really interesting because I'm watching it with Sicilians, and we're watching it in Italian, so they hopefully will appreciate the dialogue and the story. And then, I think so it's going to be really interesting actually watching The Godfather in Sicily with actual Sicilians. So I really look forward to this project. It's going to take a long time, but all good things are worth effort. And take care, YouTube. I'll talk to you real soon. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.